The orchestra was still playing when William pushed back his chair. He did not slam it. He did not shout. He simply stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked across the ballroom floor while 300 guests fell silent. The musicians kept playing because no one had told them to stop. The candles kept flickering because fire does not care about family. And somewhere behind him, Camilla had just taken her ceremonial seat beside the Heritage Legacy Award. Every person in that room connected his departure to her arrival. No one needed a whispered explanation. No one needed a program note. The empty chair did all the work. But the problem that put William on his feet did not begin in the ballroom. It began 7 hours earlier in a private study on the second floor with a promise and then a pen. To understand why William walked out of a royal gala, you have to go back weeks before the event. Charles sat with William and Catherine in a private drawing room. The Heritage Legacy Award was the centerpiece of the gala season. It honoured a historical portrait collection tied to decades of royal patronage. The award carried visibility, cultural authority, and genuine public meaning. This was not a minor courtesy or a ceremonial footnote. Charles made a promise that afternoon, not through advisors, not through a private secretary leaving a formal note. He told William and Catherine directly that Catherine would present the award. He confirmed it in person. He said the words himself. Then he moved on to other business because the matter was settled. There was nothing left to negotiate. The promise was simple, clear, and final. William told Catherine. Catherine prepared. She spent weeks in quiet engagement with the Heritage Committee. She studied the portrait collection piece by piece. She met with the curators who had assembled it. She reviewed the history behind each work. She drafted her presentation remarks and rehearsed them until the language felt natural. The selection was not random or political. It was deliberate, carefully vetted, and approved at every level. Catherine had earned this role through preparation, not privilege. The morning of the gala, William reviewed the printed programme. Catherine's name appeared beside the award presentation exactly where it belonged. He set it aside because his father had given his word. In William's world, a word from the king still meant something real. That word lasted until 4:15 in the afternoon. One moment changed everything that followed. At 4:15, Camilla walked into Charles's private study. She did not knock softly or linger in the doorway. She entered with purpose. What followed was not a casual conversation over afternoon tea. It was a focused argument built on a single premise. Excluding the Queen from the most visible presentation would make her look secondary. It would tell every guest, every camera operator, and every headline writer that the Queen was decorative rather than central. The Queen would be present, but invisible. Camilla laid the problem on the table with precision. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The argument carried its own weight. Charles listened. He sat with two loyalties pressing against each other. His promise to William on one side, the institutional logic of his wife's argument on the other. He weighed them carefully and then picked up his pen. He crossed out Catherine's name on the programme. One stroke, deliberate and clear. He wrote Camilla's name above the line and signed beneath the alteration with his own hand. The change was not hidden or softened. It was documented, initialed, and final. This was not a clerical adjustment. It was a decision by the king. In his own handwriting, his private secretary stood in the room throughout. The secretary later confirmed hearing Charles say something quiet but unmistakable. William will see this as a challenge. He said it without looking up from the page. He knew what he was doing. He knew what it would cost. and he signed it anyway. Camilla's response was immediate. The future king needed to learn. The crown could not operate according to his feelings. She said it as though she had prepared the sentence in advance. Those words would travel further than either of them intended. They would reach William within hours. And when they did, they would change everything about the evening that followed. The revised programme reached William minutes before the procession. A staff member handed it to him in a corridor near the entrance. William unfolded it and saw his father's handwriting above Catherine's crossed-out name. He understood immediately. His father had not forgotten the promise. He had overwritten it. The crossed-out name was not a scheduling error. It was a deliberate act. That distinction changed everything. A forgotten promise can be forgiven because forgetting is human. But an overwritten promise demands a response, because overwriting is a choice. William folded the programme along its original creases. He placed it inside his jacket pocket against his chest. He said nothing to Catherine, nothing to his equerry, nothing to his protection officers. He walked into the gala carrying the evidence of a broken word into a room designed for celebration. The document rested against his heart like a second pulse, quiet and persistent. Every step toward the ballroom was a step toward a decision he had already made. He had not told anyone what he intended. He did not need to. The programme told the whole story. The ballroom was magnificent that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across long tables draped in white linen. Silver gleamed beside porcelain. Flowers arranged that morning held their colour. Guests arrived in their usual order, moving through the rituals of diplomacy and conversation. The orchestra played pieces chosen weeks in advance. Everything appeared orderly, but William sat in his chair, with the folded programme against his chest. He ate when food arrived. He nodded when conversation reached him. Behind every gesture, he was counting time toward the moment he knew was coming. When Camilla entered the presentation area and took her ceremonial seat, William stood. The timing was precise. He rose as she sat. The symmetry was impossible to miss. He crossed the ballroom floor at a pace that suggested neither anger nor panic. He walked like a man who had made his decision hours ago. His shoes made no sound on the polished floor. Behind him, on the white tablecloth, he left a handwritten card. You gave me your word she would not take that seat. No title beneath. No signature. Just those words placed exactly where his dinner plate had been. 7 words that carried more weight than any speech delivered that evening. That was the chair that answered. Not with argument. Not with volume. With absence. The guests did not know the full story. They saw a prince leave and a queen arrive. They drew their own conclusions. But the real crisis had nothing to do with schedules or seating charts. It had to do with a father who signed a change knowing it would wound his son, and a son who responded not with words, but with an empty seat. The absence was the answer. The silence was the argument. The empty place setting was the verdict. Consider what William understood in that moment of rising. He understood the change had been discussed before it was made. He understood his reaction had been predicted. He understood that despite predicting his objection, his father signed anyway. Each layer of that knowledge made sitting still more impossible. Silence would have meant consent. And if the future king accepted that promises from the crown meant nothing, what would the crown be worth when it rested on his head? What happened next did not appear in any official account of the evening. There were no cameras. There were no press offices nearby. What happened next existed only between 2 people and the walls of a narrow corridor. William found Camilla in a passage between 2 reception rooms. There were no titles in that hallway, no ceremony, No advisors at a respectful distance. Just two people and a folded piece of paper. William asked one question. Why did you accept an honour you knew was promised to Catherine? His voice was low and controlled. Camilla said she stood with her husband. She said supporting the king was not an attack on Catherine. She said she would no longer apologise for occupying the position the crown gave her. But William was not listening for her defence. He was listening for acknowledgement. He wanted to hear that a promise had been broken. He wanted her to see the difference between earning a role and taking one already given. He did not get that acknowledgement. He got something worse. Camilla's words from the afternoon study were relayed to him through palace staff. The future king needed to understand. The crown could not operate according to his feelings. Learning that his objections had been anticipated and deliberately dismissed changed something in William. Walking away from the ballroom had been principled, but now he needed more than absence. He needed a boundary. He pulled the folded programme from his jacket. He held it between them in the dim corridor light. The paper was soft from hours against his chest. Camilla reached for it, not aggressively, almost gently, as if she meant to read it or set it aside. William pulled it back. A small movement, barely visible, but in that narrow hallway, it converted paper into a wall. He folded the programme one more time, a precise, deliberate movement that made it something hard and final. He held it at his side like a line drawn on the floor between them. That document was no longer a schedule. It was proof. Proof the promise existed. Proof it had been erased. Proof the erasure was signed by the king himself. The chair that answered had followed him out of the ballroom and into this corridor. It was no longer an empty seat. It was a boundary made of paper, principle, and the refusal to pretend. Camilla did not cross that line. She held his gaze for a long moment, steady and unblinking. Then she turned and walked toward the reception. No voices had been raised, no threats had been made, but something shifted between them that could not be shifted back. The confrontation was quiet, contained, and absolute. Now the motive becomes fully clear. William did not walk out to embarrass his father. He did not walk out to humiliate Camilla. He did not leave because he wanted a headline. He walked out because the alternative was worse. Sitting in that chair while the replacement was completed would have sent a dangerous message. It would have taught every future advisor that a commitment from the crown could be erased with one pen stroke. That lesson was more destructive than any photograph or headline. That lesson would have outlived the gala by decades. The walkout was not spontaneous. William understood what was coming the moment he read the revised programme. He chose his response before the music started. He carried the proof because he knew he would need it. The handwritten card was composed in advance. Every detail points toward careful calculation. He weighed the options, the way a man weighs two kinds of damage, and he chose the damage he could live with. But there is another way to read Camilla's position. Honesty requires acknowledging it clearly. She was not wrong that the Queen's absence from the presentation sent its own troubling message. Protocol had evolved. Her role had expanded over years of careful work. Standing beside her husband at the most visible moment was not necessarily a power grab. From her perspective, it was a natural expression of her position. She did not create this tension. She responded to a gap that had been growing for months. The problem was not that she wanted the seat. The problem was that the seat had already been promised to someone else. And that distinction made all the difference. Charles occupied the most painful position of all. He made a promise he believed that morning, By afternoon, he faced an argument he could not dismiss. Excluding his wife from the centerpiece would undermine everything he had spent years building. He chose the crown over the father. He chose institutional logic over personal loyalty. He chose the argument that sounded reasonable over the promise already made. And in doing so, he lost the trust of the one person whose trust he could least afford to lose. The fallout arrived with the morning papers. Not gradually, not in whispers. It arrived with photographs and bold type. Headlines ignored the Heritage Legacy Award entirely. They focused on the empty chair. Commentators split between those who called William reckless and those who called him principled. Allies of Camilla said she had been humiliated publicly. They said the disagreement belonged behind closed doors. Allies of William said the private channels were exhausted the moment Charles signed the revised programme. The palace issued no formal statement, no clarification, no carefully worded expression of family unity. That silence confirmed everything. The wound was real. The division was genuine. The resolution would not come quickly, but it did come, slowly, painfully, through conversations that no one recorded and compromises that no one announced. 1 week later, the Heritage Legacy Award was presented again in a smaller ceremony. The grand ballroom was replaced by an intimate gallery with soft lighting. Catherine stood at the podium. She delivered remarks that were warm, measured, and focused entirely on the portrait collection. She made no reference to the gala or the headlines. She honoured the portraits. She honoured the history. She simply did what she had been promised she would do, and she did it beautifully. William sat in the front row. He had reclaimed his seat. Not the same physical chair, not the same room, but the same principle. He was present because the promise had been restored. He was present because accountability had produced correction. He was present because loyalty does not demand permanent anger. Loyalty demands truth. It demands consequence. And it demands the courage to come back after the truth has been spoken. As the ceremony ended, William walked toward the exit and past Camilla's chair. She was seated 3 rows back, composed and still. He paused for less than a second. He gave one small, deliberate nod. Not forgiveness, not surrender, not an apology, not a permission to forget what had happened. Just recognition that the storm had passed and the institution had survived. Just the willingness to share a room again. That nod carried the weight of everything that had happened over 1 brutal week. The promise made in a drawing room, the pen stroke at 4:15, the ballroom crossing that silenced 300 guests, the handwritten card left on white linen, the dim corridor and the folded programme held like a boundary, the empty chair that spoke louder than any voice. And now the return, the deliberate, difficult choice to sit down again. The hardest walk of all was not the one out of the ballroom. It was the one back in. The chair that answered was never about furniture. It was about what happens when the one person who cannot afford to break promises breaks one anyway. It was about the difference between a throne and a seat. A throne is given by history. A seat is earned by trust. William lost his seat when his father picked up that pen. He earned it back when he walked out. He confirmed it when he walked back in. The public saw a prince leave a gala. This film revealed the problem his departure was designed to solve. Not anger, not rivalry, not ambition. Just a son who needed his father to understand one thing. A word once given must be kept. Not because keeping it is easy, not because breaking it would go unnoticed, but because the person who gave it chose to give it freely, even when the crown says otherwise, even when the Queen says otherwise, especially then, because the monarchy does not survive on ceremony alone. It does not survive on crowns or thrones or the right music at the right moment. It survives on the quiet decisions when someone keeps a promise nobody would have noticed, and it fractures on the quiet decisions when someone breaks one. A broken promise between strangers is forgotten within days. A broken promise between father and son echoes through generations. William kept his promise. Charles did not. That was the whole point. That was Tard.